NBC's Kristen Welker, moderator of Meet the Press, just spoke to him on the phone right now. What did he have to say, Kristen?
Well, Chris, this was a short conversation. It lasted about 15 minutes. It's clear the president-elect feeling quite bullish in the wake of that decisive victory on Tuesday night. In terms of the big headline here, we talked about what he believes is his mandate. Here's how he described it. He said, quote, "It's a mandate to bring common sense back to the country." So I said, OK, so what are you going to do first? He identified making the border safe and secure as his first priority. I then pressed him on what he's long talked about, his mass deportation plan. I said, how are you going to pay for it? He said, it's not a question of a price tag. It's not really. We have no choice. When people have killed and murdered, when drug lords have destroyed countries, and now they're going to go back to those countries because they're not staying here, there is no price tag. That really gives you a sense, I think, Chris, of how he is feeling emboldened in the wake of his big win. We also talked about those phone calls that he had with President Biden, with Vice President Harris. He said they were both very nice phone calls, both ways. He said he did say that Vice President Harris talked about the importance of having a peaceful transition of power. Trump saying he agreed with that wholeheartedly. Of course, that comes 4 years after January 6th, in which we did see violence at the nation's capital. But again, Trump stressing that in that call, the vice president made a point of saying that she wants to see a peaceful transfer of power. I pressed him on what world leaders he's spoken to. He said he believes he's spoken to about 70. He says the calls keep coming in. He said ultimately he's going
Kristen?
to. That's what he said. He said ultimately he's going to release a list of how many world leaders he has spoken to so far. He said he has spoken to President Zelensky. He's spoken to Prime Minister Netanyahu. I asked if he's spoken to President Putin of Russia. He said he has not spoken to President Putin, but anticipates that the leaders will speak. Of course, he has spoken a lot about wanting to end the war there within 24 hours.
One of the big conversations people have been having is what a Biden administration would look like. Did you have time to ask him about that? Any of the people? There's a lot of speculation about that, even some people who have taken themselves out of contention for potential roles in a new administration. But did you have a chance to ask him about that?
Great question, Chris. I did. I have to caveat this by saying that the conversation ended as I was just getting going with that line of questioning. He did, when I asked him about his chief of staff, he said, well, name some people. I said, well, what about Susie Wiles? We're hearing a lot of buzz about Susie Wiles. He had a lot of praise for Susie Wiles, saying that he likes her very much, that she would be someone he would consider to be a strong choice. I then asked him about our reporting that Senator Tom Cotton has taken his name out of contention for potentially joining the administration. He had a lot of praise for Tom Cotton as well. He said, I think he's fantastic. At that point, Chris, our conversation wound down, but it is clear he's just starting to think about some of those decisions.
I know you said it was a brief conversation, but if he's already spoken to 70 leaders, I think 15 minutes is probably more than he's spent with some world leaders. So good on you, my friend.
Thank you, Chris. Really appreciate it.